Okay, thank you for the confirmation. So, I welcome you all, and so good afternoon, all. Today, I shall discuss very basics about experiments, its design and analysis. So actually earlier I have planned some other lecture, but I think 2 or 3 days back, Professor Siddiqui sent me the schedule, and then I saw that probably most of the contents will overlap with other speakers. So I made changes. Still, you may feel that there is some overlap with other speakers, but still I tried my best to make it at least different by some extent, if not by 100%. So I think you will find that at least 50-60% content is different from other content. Other thing, while preparing this lecture, uh, because design of experiment is mostly about probability, etc. So uh, we can't say that very hard mathematics, but very basic mathematics is there really related to probabilities. So because it's very basic and audience is also from engineering background, so I did not put all those equations. I at least I try to avoid. By some extent you may find, but I think by and large you will find that the presentation was easy to understand and it was very basic but important. In start itself I can say, if it is not up to your expectation, then I really feel sorry, but I put my efforts. And on this topic, this is my first lecture actually. Usually I give lecture on manufacturing processes, on those I have command, but when I got this invitation, then I thought, okay, let me learn some new thing and try to deliver a lecture. So this is the outline of my presentation. So I will discuss about basics of experiments and its design. Then some aspects of data like data collection, its processing, how to collect, how to process, how to compare data, all those aspects. Then based on data, how to make decisions, then how to prepare questionnaires uh, for research where some survey is needed. Then to make our decision rational, how to do hypothesis testing. And usually when we do research and especially survey type, then we have a lot of data, then how to present those data. So some index notation, then how to select sample size, because like sample size we can take, we can go with 10 data or we can go with 10,000 data. So how to select, and then a very brief about like whatever we are discussing, how it can be important for the mechanical engineer and especially from the manufacturing aspects. And then I will conclude my talk. So if we see what is experiment, and if we go by Oxford Dictionary meaning, then it says that it is a scientific test that is done in order to get proof of something or new knowledge. It means something we want to prove, whether it's some hypothesis, some theory, some mechanism, that can be proved with experiment, or we can also perform it to gain some new knowledge. So completely new knowledge can also be gained. And if we go by book definition, then we can say it is a test or series of runs in which purposeful changes are made to input variables of a process or system, so that we may observe and identify the regions for changes that may be observed in the output response. So it means we make the changes in the input variables, and in response to that, output response changes, and we create a relationship between these changes. Means change in input variable, how these changes are related to the change in output response. Experiments can be performed at various levels. It can be at personal level, at community level, at high scientific end level or at very basic like some communication. Even if we communicate with some other person to take some inputs, that can also be fall into the category of experiments. So means we don't have any hard and fast definition. Only thing, we try to gain some information by some mean. Most of the time it is controllable, but some experiments may not be controllable and they go by the natural flow. So but all these kind of techniques, they all fall in the category of experiments. Then we can also uh, categorize them in terms of natural and human sciences. So some experiments can be conducted on natural sciences. On that, actually, it is easier to control the parameters. So for example, suppose I want to conduct some experiment on gravity, then it is well known fact that what is going to be the gravitational force, and with the change in the shape of the earth or with the change in the height from the earth's surface, how it is going to change. But suppose I want to conduct some research on the human psychology or human behavior or human ergonomics, then it is not very easy to control, because all humans are different in nature, physique, strength, food habit, etc. So all those uh, deviations, which is largely, or we can say large deviations from one person to another person, uh, will affect the experiment outcomes, and that's why it is very difficult to control. So for example, suppose if we want to understand experiment by means of some example, then suppose we have turning process and we want to compare the turning process with laser assisted turning. Then what we can do, that we can perform two turning process, one without laser heat, without applying laser heat, and other with all other parameters are same as for turning process, but only thing we will change is that we will apply the laser heat. So since all other parameters are same, then in process outcome, whatever we will observe, that will reflect the effect of the laser heating. Similarly, suppose on human being, we want to test what is the effect of sodium chloride. So uh, usually it is believed that if it is consumed in large amount, then blood pressure increases. But to have rational conclusion, we want to conduct the experiment. Then we can make two categories of the people. To one category of people, we will give NaCl, and to other category, we will not give. And then we can have comparison between them. And if average blood pressure for the group of people who are consuming NaCl is more, then we can say, okay, NaCl increases blood pressure. But again, like because in second example, the human being is involved. So it may also be possible that even some uh, people are consuming sodium chloride, but still their blood pressure is lower than the other group. But those are exceptions, or we can say that because human being is different from each other, so those kind of effect may be there. So in this case, where means uncontrollable parameters are more. So for example, for human being, in that case, we have to take large or large amount of samples, so that average will give us some direction towards conclusions. These are some of the terms which are used in experiments or experiment design. So we can say design variables. So these are basically factors. So suppose, for example, for turning, we can have cutting speed, depth of cut, or chuck rotation, etc. Then values of design variable, these can be various levels. Say, for example, for cutting speed, we can have different levels. We can categorize it in terms of qualitative, say we can say low cutting speed, medium cutting speed, and high cutting speed, or we can define like 10 meter per second, 20 meter per second, 30 meter per second. So means different levels of different factors. Noise factors are the variables over which we have no control, and they basically create some noise due to their random existence. Say, for example, if we have some material, then at macroscopic level, material properties can have large variations, and that variation will reflect in cutting process as well, or even like anisotropy in properties. So these kind of parameters, or maybe random variation in the workpiece geometries over which we don't have any control, those are noise factors. Or even sometime what can happen, like suppose we purchase material from one supplier and same material we purchase from other supplier, both material can give different result. That kind of noise factor may also be there. Then control factors are there, means these are the variables which we can easily control. So like in turning, it can be cutting speed, depth of cut, tool rotation, etc. Chuck rotation. And in experiment one, so this is, we can say this is the schematic how these experiment thing are related with. So we have some factors and levels. We change the factors and their levels, and we give those as in to the experiments, and based on that we have some observation or change in the output variables. So from output we make the observations or conclusions. This is the basic schematic of any experimental system. So in which we have any process in which we give input as a variable parameters, and those variable parameters are basically controllable factors. And there are some controllable factors as well, which creates noise, and we get the output. Here you can see like we have many controllable factors, but most of the time during experiment we don't vary all of them together. We vary, most of the time we vary one of them, or in the combination of 2 or 3 only, but all variable or factors are not varied at a time. Otherwise it will be very difficult to analyze that this change is existing because of change in which variable. That will be very difficult. Now if we come to design of experiment, so design of experiment is nothing but it is the way how we perform the experiments so that we get reliable information with less number of experiments, so that we can save our time, resources, and money. So if we design the experiment properly, then it brings out a large amount of information with limited number of experiments. So during design of experiments, the levels may be discrete or analog. Both kind of thing may be there. Say for example, we can have depth of cut 1 mm, 2 mm, 3 mm, or 0.5 mm, or some other variable maybe like coolant is on and off. So both kind of thing may be there. It's not always that we have to have some numerical value only. Okay. So if we see different types of experiment, then traditional way of performing experiment is that we keep all the factors constant and we vary one parameter, so that on output we can observe the effect of that varying parameter. But with this method, the main problem is that it won't give much information. Maybe it will give some information about that varying parameter, but interaction effect cannot be analyzed or predicted using this technique, because it is quite possible that if we change other factor as well, then outcome may be totally different. Then other approach can be full factorial, in which we make various possible combinations of different factors and different levels. So suppose we have uh, two factors and three levels, then 2 raised to power 3. Total 8 experiments we will perform. But problem with this approach is also first advantage, if we see that, then we can say that it gives complete information about the system. All various possible combinations can be analyzed, means we get maximum possible information with this approach. But problem is, if we have more number of factors and more number of levels, then number of experiments will become too high to uh, that it will become difficult to manage. Say, for example, suppose if we have 4 factors and 5 levels, then total number of experiments which we have to conduct is 4 raised to power 5. And sometimes number of factors can be very high, especially if we look on the aspect of like uh, human behavior, etc. In that, number of factors can be 20, 30 also, and number of levels also can go up to 20, 30, 50, like that. So in that case, it almost become infeasible to go for full factorial design of experiment. So because it will increase the cost, time, and other than that, sometime even we are getting more information, but we may not come to any conclusion because we will get confused between so much data, how to analyze it. So finally, we may not come up with anything. So to handle those situations, we can go for fractional factorial, in which we design the experiments in such a way that number of experiments are reduced significantly, but we do not lose the significant information. Maybe some information will lose, but we make sure that the lost information is not significant, and their effect even can be somehow predicted with the existing experiments only. So for that, various designs are there, like ANOVA, etc. So basically, all those experiments are based on the probability only, and they are basically to have equal representation of all the factors. We make sure that number of factors are repeating, number of factors and number of levels are repeating equally, so that we will have balance between all the factors. And or we can say, if we connect it with probability, then we can say that we will have equal probability of uh, getting effect of some particular parameter. uh, for that, we will have equal probability. So these are some of the types of designs which are quite popular, and most of the softwares are also using these designs. And these designs, all of these designs have their own advantages and limitations, and that's why they are, all of them are not limited or are not applicable to all kind of applications. So for example, these three designs are suitable for screening. It means where we we want to get the answer of the questions, then either we can go for full factorial or fraction factorial or PB design. Some of the designs are suitable for to analyze the effect of input parameters on output parameters, on which these designs are there, and some of the parameters are suitable for optimizing data as well. And these are the number of design variables for which it is suitable. So you can see that full factorial design is suitable for small number of variables only. But if you need to go for large number of variable, you have to go for fractional or PB or maybe XGL design, etc. These are some of the characteristics of a good experiment. First thing, it should be comparable. So for example, I gave an example of turning process. In one process, we are applying laser, in other, we are not applying, so that conclusion can be matched. Otherwise, what will happen, we will get the conclusion and uh, uh, we will not have rational finding that, okay, because of laser cutting force is decreasing. If we want to come to the conclusion rationally, then we have to have some comparison between two outputs. Then it should be replicated multiple times to reduce the effect of uncontrollable variations and to quantify the uncertainty. Because in experiment, it is never possible that we get the same output when experiment is performed twice. And that's why there are two things here. One thing, uh, if we go for multiple experiments, then their average will give the value which is closer to the actual one. So in that way, we can say that the effect of uncontrolled variation can be reduced. And other thing, we can also quantify the uncertainty. So we can tell like this will be the range of output, or we can define in terms of other factors like coefficient of variation, or uh, maybe we can also define in terms of standard deviation. So there are various ways to quantify the uncertainty. So that can also be done. Then experiment should be unbiased. For that, we can have randomization of the sample, or sometime we can have blinding as well. Blinding means sometime we stop one kind of uh, one group of samples because they may be biased, and that is called blinding. So suppose I am using workpiece for turning process. So I may stop sample from one of the supplier on which I don't rely that their material is good or matching the quality of the desired specimen material. In that case, I can stop those samples which are coming from some particular vendor. So that is blinding. So these, by applying these things, we can stop the unbiasedness. Then process should be uh, highly pre uh, high precision should be there. Otherwise, we'll get a big range and it will be very difficult to come to a particular conclusion. Means uncertainty will be very high. So for that, we can use uniform material, uniform parameters. Uh, we can have multiple replications, or we can also have blocking. Then uh, the experiment should be simple, so it should protect the mistakes. So we should have some foolproof system that at least human mistakes should be prevented by somehow. Then wide range of applicability. For that, we can deliberately incorporate the variations in parameters, variations in material, so that the output what we get will be add to the wide range of parameters. Then we can go for factorial design. If we will go for varying one parameter at a time, then it is quite possible that it will not have wide range of applicability. Then experiment should be able to estimate the uncertainty. So for that, because to estimate the uncertainty, we have to have some replications and randomization. Then we can calculate the uncertainty. So why do we conduct the experiments? So there are many reasons. One thing is to learn from experience, and best example can be, I think, a small child which perform lot of experiments to learn the things, and based on his experience or experiments, the baby learns many things. So which things is harmful, which is not. If the baby make some action, what kind of sound will make, etc., or uh, they also learn to switch on the light, etc., based on their experiments only. We don't teach them physics to switch on the light. They just make some experiment, and then they learn that, okay, if I will press this switch, then fan will switch on, like that. Then to learn the science or engineering or some physical phenomena or mechanism, for these kind of purpose also we can conduct the experiments. Experiments is also used to engage the students in the laboratory or classroom, or, and it also helps to create their interest in some particular subject. Then experiments also help in deep understanding. Even there is a famous saying by a Chinese philosopher that I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. It means if we perform the experiment by our own, then it will increase our understanding. Then if we want to see the cause and effect, then also we can perform the experiment. Then to measure the quantitative relationship between two or more variables. So if I change one variable, how other variable will change? What is the relation, whether they are linearly connected or they have some quadratic relationship or exponential relationship. So those kind of quantitative relationship can also be formed. And it is important, uh, not like that we just um, uh, create the relationship just for the namesake that we got an equation or we got an graph. It is important because whenever we need to design a system, we have to design it in such a way that the variation on the outcome is minimum when controllable variables are changed. So suppose we want to have machining in on the shop floor, then we have to set the parameters in such a way that if there is some minor change in those controlling parameters, then quality will not affect significantly. Uh, so maybe where is pointer? Yeah. So sorry, I just. So suppose this is the graph between input and output. And if we are working in this range, then it is quite possible that small change in input variable will significantly affect the quality. But if we are working in this range, then it is always good, because in that case we will get good quality product. And small variation which may occur due to drop in voltage or maybe uh, lose concentration of the operator or uh, inconsistent material properties or change in tool properties, etc. So that's why these relations are very important, and uh, experiments help us to establish these kind of relationship. Then to test and validate the theoretical predictions, we can always validate our numerical model or analytical model with the experiments. Even we can test the theoretical assumptions. So for example, suppose uh, in PhD, I worked on laser forming. So in laser forming, while modeling the process, I made an assumption that uh, the effect of plastic deformation or heat generated due to plastic deformation is negligible in comparison with laser heat input. So, but means I made the assumptions, but how to validate? So by conducting some experiment, these assumptions can also be validated. Okay, this we can make it rational that this assumption is true or false, and if it is false, then some measure can be taken to incorporate that assumption in the model so that accuracy of the model will increase. Then for to see the variations in outcome to improve the design, so we can always have some run and trial so that the design quality will improve, production quality will improve. So means various kind of improvement, whether it's design or it can reduce the cost, it can improve the process efficiency, it can improve the product quality, etc. So in industry, it can have various applications. Then to ensure the reliability of design and predictions, uh, because uh, reliability of physical experiment is always considered better than the predicting model, because experiments are the thing which actually takes place physically, but models are always in virtual mode. So if some design is validated by experiment, it means it has higher reliability. If we talk about types of experiments, then there can be various ways to classify the experiments. And uh, means you can define like lab experiment, field experiment, or you can say uh, human psychology experiment, machine experiment, small scale experiment, large scale. So there can be various ways, but here I am giving these three based on, means we can say, in which almost all kind of experiments will fall. One can be laboratory experiment, in which we have a confined area, specific equipment, and on all the system we have good control. Other, we can have field experiment, on which we have to go to the field and there we have to collect the data. And in field experiment, many times we don't have good control over the process parameters. Then we can also have quasi or natural experiments, so which actually moves naturally. We don't have any control. So for example, suppose we want to have a survey on the effect of family size on literacy ratio. Then we don't have any control. We have to simply collect the data and we have to come to the conclusions. So similarly, based on the types of experiments, if we see by testing technique, then if we have only one variable, then we can go for real experiments or quasi experiments, or we can have repeated measures experiments. So in quasi experiment, we don't have much control on experiments. And in repeated measure experiment, there is only one participant, and he or she participates in different conditions. Say, for example, we say that NaCl increases the blood pressure, then participant will take part in that, and then uh, the same participants may go that if BP is high, then say dose X will reduce the blood pressure. Then first he can participate in NaCl consumption so that his or her BP will increase, and then he will consume that medicine so that BP will reduce. If we have many variables, then we can have randomized experiment. We can randomly select the samples, and we can on that we can have some statistical analysis. Experiments are usually not uh, one short adventure, and we have various levels. So initially, like in lab, we have run and trial experiments to check out the experimental equipment, whether they are working fine, or to set the range of the process parameters. Because if we don't know in which range we have to work, then we will be unnecessarily setting the levels, and we will be wasting our time, consuming resources, and wasting costing a lot of money. So once through initial experiments, the parameters are set or the equipments are ready to set the to perform the experiment, then we can go for main experiments, where systematic experiments are performed with proper design of experiment, and the output are recorded and the conclusions are made. So these results basically support the goal of the experiment. Then we can also have confirmation experiments, which are used to verify the results from main experiments, or to verify the results from the model. And sometime based on main experiment, we also conduct some confirmation experiment for more focused experiments. These are some of the advantages of the experiments. One thing, it can give cause and effect relationship. It can give precise control of variables uh, because it helps to conclude the influence of independent variables. Then experiments can be replicated, and we cannot generalize from the results of a single experiment, and usually we have to repeat it number of times. And as the number of times we repeat the experiment, we get more confidence, and the we can say even output is also more closer to the actual one. So experimental methods consist of standardized procedures and measures which allow it to be easily repeated. And that's why always, like while performing experiment, we talk about like which standard is used. We use some standard procedure so that repeatability can be obtained. Then with experiment, we can also get some quantitative data about the variation in the process outcome. And with this, it helps us to understand that these variations are existing by chance, or there is some issue in our samples or the experimental equipment or experimental technique or methodology. So those kind of guidelines can also be established using experiments or conducting experiments. So with experiment, advantages are it gives deep insight into the process, it established knowledge or validate the already established knowledge. Then researcher can have good control over variables. So effect of variables can be understood very precisely. Experiments are performed by human beings. So we have good control over there. Uh, these sometime experiments can be combined with other research methods for uh, rigorous analysis or for understanding of other factors as well. And experiments can be used to determine what is best for the population. Then it is close to the natural behavior because experiments are actually happening in the existing environment. So they give better, they represent the reality, they have better reliability, and then they can improve design, safety, comfort, efficiency, and then can reduce the cost and maintenance. So these are some of the advantages. But not like that experiments has all the advantages only, they have some limitations as well. And one of the most important is their artificiality. Even we said that they are conducted in real situation, but still there are many parameters which are controlled in laboratory, and that's why some artificiality impact come into the feature, and these experimental results may not represent the actual behavior or actual response of the process or the system. Then behavior of the laboratory is very narrow in its range, and by controlling the situation precisely, behavior may be very limited. But in actual, these variations are larger than the laboratory. Then many times, or even not many times, most of the time, the person who is conducting experiments, they also have some expectations, and those expectations can reflect in the results as well. And best example I can give is that we all have seen these what to say, uh, after election they conduct some survey that which party will win. What we call it, I just forgot the name.
Exit poll, sir. Exit.
Exit poll, yes, exit poll. So you can, if you will see the Republic Bharat result and the GTV result, you will see a large variation. Usually, Republic Bharat will show BJP in advantage, and Republic Bharat will show Congress or Communist parties in advantage. So, but both of them have conducted the experiment, and I don't feel that they make the manipulations. Those effect comes because both of them have different expectations, because people associated with them are from different ideology. So how it will affect when they will prepare the questionnaire, if the experimenter is not neutral, if they have some biasness, then it will reflect in their analysis, it will reflect in their preparation of questions, and it will also reflect in their conducting experiments as well, and that's why these uh, variations will come. Then in experiment, many parameters are there which are not in our hand and they cannot be controlled, and that's why that can also be a problem, that we cannot analyze all the parameters because we are not able to control them. And other thing, the uncontrollable parameters may affect the control effect of uh, controllable parameters. So in output, we will not be able to understand whether it is happening because of the effect of uncontrollable parameter or because of variation in the input parameters. So that's why these experiments are subjected to human error. Personal bias may be there, and we collect the sample that may not represent the whole population. So that kind of error may also be there. They can produce some artificial results because of any reason, which any of three which are shown here. Results may only apply to one situation and may be difficult to replicate in other situation. Then groups may not be comparable. Sometimes we make two groups to compare and it may not be comparable. So even like for example, suppose we take example of turning process itself. So turning process with coolant and without coolant. So uh, actually with coolant, sub other factor will also come into the feature, like reduction in friction force, reduction in temperature, and there may be some microstructural changes as well. So we don't know, like these uncontrollable parameters, how they are affecting the process. So human resource can be difficult to measure, and that's why it is more difficult to come to the conclusion. And when we are conducting some survey or carrying out some experiment where which have some political interest, then one can face some political pressure as well. So these are some of the limitations. But suppose if you are conducting some simulation, then political pressure will not affect it. Simply we can say that it is generated by computer, what can be done like that. Then how to collect data for from experiments or for experiments. One thing, we can have some physical experiment on the equipment or by conducting survey, etc. We can, other than that, we can conduct survey. We can take expert views, because many times collecting views of common public may not be very useful. Say for example, suppose now government plans to purchase uh, another 50 F-16 fighter jets. Then if government will conduct survey with common people like us, then our views may not have significant value to the government, because we don't know anything about the economy, foreign relations, and the technology of the fighter jet. So better to take views from experts instead of the common people. Similarly, we can also get data from literature survey or by conducting simulations. Sometimes we have some past experience, and based on that, we can contribute some data. Say, for example, I can say that in the month of Sawan, uh, mostly it is humid. The environment is humid, and at least 10 days in a month it is raining. So that is based on that past experience, I can contribute this data. Then we can make some calculations from analytical model or by some curve fitted equations that can also generate the data. We can have some forecasting, etc. Then data can also be generated by well-established facts. Say, for example, we know the relationship between current and voltage, that V is equal to IR. So if I know the voltage and current, then resistance, obviously from well-established relation, I can predict or calculate. So when we analyze the data, one thing is that we have to analyze it qualitative as well as quantitative. But sometimes we may not be interested in quantitative or and vice versa. And one of them can solve our purpose. But if we see the engineering applications, then both of them have to be seen. So qualitative can be suppose if I come to the conclusion that if family is small, then literature ratio is more. So sometimes that can solve our purpose, that okay, we have to reduce the family size to improve the literacy ratio. But sometimes we have to be quantitative. Say, for example, that minimum 50 gram of food is required for a person to be healthy in a day. So in that, we have to have quantitative as well. Or maybe like relation between weight and height can be the quantitative. If we talk about engineering applications, then mostly both things are needed, and the example can be this. This graph was recently shown by my PhD scholar to me, and he came to me, sir, that I have developed the model and the prediction accuracy is quite good. And accept this point, it is the means prediction ratio is within the 10% error range. But then I asked, okay, quantitatively it can be good, but what about this trend? You see in experiment, the bend angle almost stabilized, and maybe if you further increase the energy, then it will decrease. But if we see the numerical model result, it is continuously increasing even at higher rate. So we can't say that model is correct. So this also, especially in engineering application, we have to see, because many times we have to forecast or we have to fit the curve to get the to predict the higher range of the parameters. So if we don't compare compare it qualitatively, then if we further increase, say if I extend this curve further, then range of error you can imagine. It is just beyond our imagination, and it may further lead to the complete failure of the design. Then we can plot the data and we can observe the trend. And here, especially where we are having change in trend, that is more important. So suppose here, if I increase the scanning speed, the band angle is increasing, but after attaining a peak, it is decreasing. So suppose I take this curve, then I can come to the conclusion that if scan speed is increasing, if scan speed increases, band angle decreases. But actually it is misleading, because if I see the actual response of the process, then yeah, I forgot to mention this graph again belongs to the laser forming process, where sheet is bent by applying the laser beam. So here also we can see, like if I increase the scan speed, it first increases. And both these curves have totally different behavior. So we have to make sure that our plot is giving the correct conclusion in the wider range. Otherwise, it will be limited to the specific domain only. And if we further increase the range of the variable, then it will totally mislead. Similarly, we can also check the correlation. So, for example, here the thermocouple is calibrated. Thermocouple data is used to calibrate the thermal imaging camera, and this is the calibration plot. So we have this correlation equation, and with that we can have good prediction by thermal imaging camera. Sometime, yeah, we can also take a statistical analysis to see the variation or to quantify the variation in the data or to see whether data is correct. It may be possible, suppose if we take an example of band angle in laser forming process, we have conducted 5 experiments. In 4 experiments, we got band angle like 0.8 degree, 0.9 degree, 1 degree, 1.1 degree, 0.95 degree. And one data we got 2 degree. Then whether this 2 degree is a wrong data which happens because of experimental error or because of wrong measurement, or it is means obvious that statistics or probability say that sometime this much variation can happen. So that kind of statistical analysis can also be carried out to quantify the variations. Sometimes, suppose if we see this image, we can see that these this upper portion is the experimental weld width. Basically, this data belongs to the laser transmission welding process, and bottom one is predicted by the numerical simulations. So you can see that there is good match between experimental weld width and the predicted weld width. So if someone will see, then they can easily make the conclusion that the results are good and our model is able to nicely predict the weld width. But sometime expert, because new person can come to this conclusion, but expert can have different views because they have deep understanding about the process. So expert may say that, okay, by seeing these results, we can say that the prediction accuracy is good, but it is only at the top surface only. What about the depth? It may be possible that on depth, it is not able to predict the fusion zone. So to have good prediction accuracy, it should not only predict on the top surface, but it should be able to predict in the depth also, or we can say in the y direction as well. So sometimes the conclusion drawn by the person who is very new to in particular area may not match with the expert one, and that's why sometimes it is necessary to take views from the experts in that area. Then we can also plot the trend line to have better understanding. Say, for example, suppose we have this data, then it is very difficult to come to some conclusion that what it want to say, because there are many peaks and valleys, the zigzag data we are getting, and we don't see any particular trend. But if we plot a trend line, then we can observe, okay, this factor is increasing consistently by varying the input variables. Then change in trend must be observed very carefully. Like here, so most important thing become where the this is plastic strain. So where the plastic strain started decreasing after attaining a peak. So these things has to be taken into care. Uh, should be observed or should be analyzed carefully. So now suppose we have data, how to present them. We can have some 2, 3 or more axis plots. So 3 axis means like on y axis we can have 2 variables and on x axis we can have 1. So it will show the effect of change in the value of x to two different variables on y-axis. We can also have histogram, or we can also show some data points in the curve. So these are very common practice. Error bars are very important. Many times we miss it, but error bars will show the variations in the experimental results, and it will also show the reliability of the experiments, and that's why they are very important. So, and every time we have to have them. Many times error bars, uh, if we are not able to plot, or due to some technical reason or due to some constraint in writing paper, etc., then we can also go for some other technique, like we can define the coefficient of variations, which can be defined as the ratio of standard deviation to the average of different trials. So suppose we have 3 trials of experiment. So we will take the standard deviation of 3 trials, and then we will divide it with the average of 3 trials. That will give the coefficient of variations. Or we can define the standard deviation, etc. So those kind of practice can also be there. We can also have correlation equation between input and output variables. So this equation will represent the relationship between input and output data. So in that case, we don't need to plot it. That equation, we will simply put the value of one variable and it will give the output of the uh, process outcome variables. Similarly, we can also make tables, and in table it is always convenient to give the value of coefficient of variations instead of giving different uh, uh, value of different trials. Then how to give value, that also sometimes very important, like how many uh, number of decimal values are needed. So sometimes suppose I say that our value is 0.7 or 0.79. So even it looks like in fraction, the value is changed on the second digit, but if we see the variation, it is almost about 10%, or maybe even it is more than 10%. And suppose I say I define some output 10.00001, then also it doesn't make sense. So we have to be rational in defining the decimal values, and many times we can present the average value. Suppose we have 5 trials, then it becomes very confusing, and lot of space is also needed if we put all the 5 values, and then one have to see all the 5 values to see the variation, etc. So in that case, we can take the average, we can define the coefficient of variation, or we can define the range that, okay, for this particular value, the output is varying from say 9 to 10 or 9 to 11. In that way, we can define in terms of range also. Or to show the variations, we can also define the R square value. So in that way, we can take care of all these things. We can also present the data in terms of contour, and in that case, we should properly select the lines and colors, and we can also show some images. So for example, if we take example of this table, so this is again data from experiments conducted on laser bending process at different line energies, and total 5 experiments were conducted. So you can imagine if I would be putting all 5 data here, then this table could become very confusing to understand. Instead of that, what we did, that we took average experimental value and we defined the coefficient of variation to show the variation in different results. And here we put the simulation value, and then we calculated the error. So within 4 columns, we could present lot of data. Similarly, for temperature, we measured the temperature experimentally and then defined the coefficient of variations. And then we took the simulation result and then we calculated the error. So in that way, means it gives better clarity on the data, and uh, it takes less space and easy to understand if we present the data properly. Other way could be that we could define a range of pentangles and then we could also present the average value as well. Because range also sometime average can be closer to one side of the range. So we have to show that average as well. So here you can say that in data we have show the range, different data points. So we can say good plot, but this we can say bad plot because it is showing only average value, but it is not showing the range of the data. Similarly, this table we can say a good table because here you can see that uh, fractional values are consistent and are almost in line with the values. But here on B, after only two fractional values are here. In A it is 4, in C it is 3. Means there is no consistency. We don't know means what is our requirement. So how much accuracy we want in our results, and based on that we have to decide. But here, without thinking anything, the values are put, and that's why we can say it is a bad table. Similarly, to see the data error, we have data and we have error between them. Then we have to see that this much error is acceptable or not. Sometimes even large variation in data is also acceptable uh, because sometimes we may need only qualitative result, not quantitative. In that, error doesn't matter even. Then data error should be acceptable and it should be presented nicely. So for presentation, some techniques I already told. And sometime like actually when I was in my MTech, I was reading a paper, and in that I have seen that there was one input variable and there was output variable, and there was a comparison between numerical and experimental results. So I saw that the result is matching very nicely. So that graph was interesting. I was trying to put that graph here, but I could not find it. So I just put this schematic by hand and put this photo. So actually, I just go through that and I saw that input or experimental results are in good agreement with the simulation results. And I just scroll down. I started reading other sections. In between, suddenly it came in my mind that they are just validating the experimental result. So there is only one input and one output. Why do they have two axes? Here, like one axis is this, and for output, there are two axes. Then I scrolled back. And then I saw that on one axis it was output response for experiment, and on other axis it was output response for simulation. Then again, like I could not notice, but I was thinking, why did they put on same? They could put output response and one plot for experiment, one simulation. And suddenly I observed that labels of the axis means axis same. And then I realized that if we make the axis label similar, then error was more than 100%. But their trends were same. And by putting both the response on different axes, it was looking like that both are in good agreement, as you can see here. So here also, if you will see that in this position, there is more than even 100%, but it looks like in good agreement. So sometimes these techniques can also be applied. So I am not saying here to confuse the reviewer or to cheat the reviewer. Uh, by putting these tactics. What I want to say is that sometimes error is not important, but trend is important. So in that case, we can go for these techniques. But obviously, definitely, we have some research ethics as well, not to mislead the fact or misguide the readers. So if we feel that maybe is acceptable for our case, but trend is more important, then these kind of techniques may also be adopted. Then repeatability, also we have to see while analyzing the data error, then trend, accuracy and precision. This is very popular. Probably all of you know what is difference between precision and repeatability, but I just put that this is the case. Suppose this is our target and these are our data points where outputs are recorded. Then in that case, we can say that our results are neither accurate because they are far away from value and nor precise. But in this case, all data points are away from the target, but they just close to each other. It means they are not accurate, but they are precise. Then again, these are close to target, but away from each other. So they are somewhat accurate, but not precise. And in this case, it is accurate as well as precise. So no doubt we can say that most ideal condition is that we always need to have this kind of situation where data are accurate as well as precise. But can someone tell that among these three, or even we can say that we never want this situation also where data is neither accurate nor precise. Can someone tell that among this, which one is better, not accurate and precise or accurate but not precise? Which one you feel is better?
The second one.
Which one?
Which of the no.
I'm sorry, I think there is some bandwidth issue. I'm not able to hear you.
Third,
Accurate and precise.
third one. Number
Accurate.
3.
Number 3. Okay. Yeah, but
Maybe number 4.
4 obviously it is always acceptable and desirable. First one is never desirable. Among 2 and 3, but yeah, in a way you can say that accurate but not precise is acceptable if we look on the aspect that it is able to predict in better way. But if you look from other aspect, that here we have just offset from the target value. And if we are able to manage this offset, say values we are getting in this, we can sum or subtract or divide or multiply with some factor, and then these values will become accurate as well as precise as well. It means we have to have some calibration, and then these values will become accurate as well as precise. So we can say that both are okay if we are able to calibrate or make these adjustments, then this condition is better. And if we are not able to make that, then we can say that accurate but not precise will solve our purpose in better way. But these kind of problems are easy to handle because we have to have just a small calibration by multiplying, subtraction, etc. Then suppose we have a set of data and among them it is quite possible that we can have some wrong data. How to identify them? That wrong data can be because of random variations or because of wrong measurement, and there can be any reason. So there can be some basic techniques which we use in our day-to-day life, like we can gauge minimum and maximum values. So suppose I am collecting data of the age of the human being, then I just go through the data and suppose I find some data value is 400 years, then obviously it is wrong data. So sometimes just going through the data carefully, we can identify the wrong data. Sometimes some data can be missing, then also we can say it is wrong. So we can look for the missing. So for that we can have some counting, we can sort the data, we can classify them in different categories, we can apply some filter, etc. Then we can also check the values of categorical variables. Say, for example, suppose I am collecting data of fail pass, and somewhere I can put F for fail and P for pass. But if I will analyze those data based on just sorting that, considering fail data only, then data associated with where I have marked F, those will miss, and it will lead to the misconclusion. Similarly, incidence rate also of binary variables. So for example, sometime for yes, we can put 1, and for no, we can put 0. That can also create some problem. So we have to be consistent. And other than that, we can have some mathematical techniques as well. And basically, we will discuss it in hypothesis testing techniques. So some statistical techniques like defining R value or having hypothesis testing. By those techniques also, we can identify the wrong data. Now suppose we have some data with us, then how to make the decision. So one can be the scientific decision. So based on the experimental result, we come to some conclusion and then we make the decision. Other thing, we can select we can go for the poll, and majority of the samples what suggest, or majority of the expert what decide, we can go for that. Other thing, we can take expert view, and example I gave because of that reason only. If we even on survey kind of study also, if we want to be more rational and mathematically we want to analyze, then we can go for statistical analysis as well. Obviously, because it is statistical, obviously there are some, we have to put some confidential level, and some uncertainty may be there in decision. But most of the time, suppose if risk is high, then we can put a higher confidence level, say 99%, then we can reduce the cost of uncertainty. Then we can have some prediction techniques also. So we have some data, and then based on that we forecast, and then, or we can have some simulations, etc. Based on that also we can make the decision based on past experience also. So because past experience also work like data for us. And sometime we just make the decision based on the random assignment, because we are not able to come to any conclusion. Then akkad bakkad Bombay wo means we just randomly select, we have to go for this or that, and let time decide whether decision was correct or not. So these can be the various ways to make the decisions. Now hypothesis testing. So in scientific investigations, many times we make some assumptions and then we test them for the validity. So it means before conducting experiment itself, we make some statement and we assume that statement is true until it is proved false. So for that we have hypothesis testing. So if hypothesis testing validate our statement, it means our hypothesis is correct, and if not, then hypothesis is wrong. So hypothesis may not support by experimental result, but it is not always because hypothesis is wrong. There can be basically two reasons. One thing is hypothesis is itself is wrong, and other thing, we have some random errors in the experimental results. So if we have biased random processes, then also hypothesis may not be supported by the experimental result. And technique to find whether the difference between hypothesis and the experimental result is significant or not, that testing is called hypothesis test. So we can have two kinds of, one is null hypothesis in which statement has single value. So for example, I say mean flow stress of the material is 350 megapascal, then it is null hypothesis. And sometimes it can be comparison based as well. Say for example, melting temperature of both the specimens is same. This is also null hypothesis. In alternate hypothesis, statement about population characteristics usually being larger or smaller than the specific value. So if we say it is larger than this or smaller than this, then it will be one-sided or one-tailed test. And if we define in general, say different from specific value, then it is two-sided or two-tailed test. Say, for example, for one-sided example can be the mean flow stress of the material is smaller than or larger than 300 megapascal. Because we are here restricting to the one side. The, if I say it is smaller than 300 megapascal, so in that case, in any way, it cannot be more than 300 megapascal, and that's why it's one-sided. But if I keep it open for both sides, say for example, I say mean flow stress of the material is not 300 megapascal. It means it can be more than 300 megapascal as well as less than 300 megapascal. So it is two-sided alternative hypothesis. And to check this hypothesis testing, we go for test of significance. So where actually what we test that the variation in hypothesis is and the actual value is enough to accept or reject the hypothesis. We understand the hypothesis testing by an example. Suppose I say that mean flow stress of the material is 300 megapascal with a standard deviation of 20 megapascal. Okay, suppose I got this value from some book, and I test 500 pieces of same material and get a mean flow stress of 290 megapascal. Then because average was 300, mine is lesser than, but it is very close to it. Now, what should I assume? That this difference is significant enough that I should come to the conclusion that both materials are same and this variation is due to experimental error only, or this much error is not acceptable and we can say that both materials are different and they are not from the same population. So for that, hypothesis testing has to be carried out. So for this, first we have to set the null hypothesis. So that can be like sample of 500 test pieces has been taken from population with mean flow stress of 300 megapascal. We can set in other language as well, like we can set that the tested specimen have flow stress of 300 megapascal, or the tested specimens and the population material is same. So we can define as per our convenience, which give better understanding to ourselves. Then we define, we calculate the test statistic. We can calculate using this formula and we get this value. Now we have to define some appropriate confidence level. So we can define like 90%, 95%, 99%. These are popular, but it can be even larger or lower than as well. So if I take say confidence level, say 95%, but it means that 95% time, if we talk in terms of probability, 95% time, this testing, hypothesis testing will be true, but 5% time it may be wrong. So in that case, what can happen? 5% time, it can happen that our hypothesis is correct, but it will get rejected because of uncertainty of 5%. So that kind of error is called type 1 error, and opposite is called type 2 error. It means hypothesis is wrong, but it will accept. That is type 2 error. So like what value of high confidence level is to be taken. So that we can decide based on the cost of type 1 or type 2 error. So if the cost of making type 1 error is high, then we can go for higher value of confidence level and vice versa. So basically, this is the normal curve which usually we see. Usually any phenomena, it is expected that will have this kind of trend. Obviously, shape of the curve can be different, but more or less it will follow the normal distribution. And basically this hypothesis testing works on probability, and those probabilities are calculated based on this normal distribution of the variables. Now we shall calculate this Z we have calculated. So we shall compare the value of Z with Z alpha. Z alpha we shall get for different confidence level. So for 95% confidential level, it is 1.96 sigma. So we can get from some table, etc. these values. And then we will compare. And if this relation is satisfied, then we can say that hypothesis is correct and the difference is not significant to reject it. It means we should accept it. But if it is not satisfied, it means this Z is greater than Z alpha, then we have to reject the hypothesis. And for our case, this is not true. So we can say that this hypothesis is not correct and our material does not belong to the population material. Both are same. Similarly, means there are many techniques, not a single one. And sometime like if sample size is small, then we can go for students t-test. If we have want to compare between two populations, then we can go for this kind of test. So there are many others as well, but all of them have some common thing that they work on the probability. Say now we have to optimize data also for most of the time. So for that we have many conventional and non-conventional techniques. But problem with conventional technique is that they can sometimes stick to the local minima. Say for example, our response is this. So if we go for bisection techniques, then sometime our solution can stuck here, and but global optimum is this one. So global optimum we may not get, but for that also we have some advanced technique like genetic algorithm, etc., and we can go for that. So like suppose we have this data. So can some of you can tell that suppose these are the name of the students, total 7 students are there, and these are the names in physics, chemistry, and math. So which student is best among all these? Any of you, if want to tell? Siddiqui ji, can I take more, means 10 more?
Welcome, sir. Welcome. You can take, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And
Sir,
your lecture is going very fine, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, B.
B
Okay.
becomes consistent. So B is better.
Okay.
I think A, sir, A.
Yeah, in that way we can say A also.
But it is, yes, yes.
Yeah. So thanks for responding. So actually here, what we can say that we can't generalize that
Yes, yes, sir.
that A is performing means above average in all 3 subjects, then it is best. We because it is multivariable problem. So it depends how much weightage we are giving to which subject. Suppose someone says that for me, a student is good who get good marks in physics. So for him, G is the best student. Or maybe for mathematics teacher, E is the best student. And similarly for chemistry, some person who feel that if someone is good in chemistry, he is genius. For them, F is good. So we can say that if we see that except C, we can say all are optimum solutions, or we can say all are good student. because C is not able to compete in any of the subject. Because say for 59, 72 is more, for 40, 73 is more, for 43, 79 is more. C is obviously inferior than B, whatever we put or whatever the criteria we put, whatever weightage we give. So that's why except C, we can say any of the 6 solutions can be the optimum solution, and the what weightage we define, that will give the final optimum solution. And that's why multi-variable optimization problem is more critical, and we have to take care about what weightage we are giving, what constraints we are defining, and it should not because they have like interactive effects. So there are more chances to stuck in the into the local optimum solutions. Global, it is more difficult to get the global solutions, and that's why for these we have to go for some advanced techniques like GA. Now, suppose we have to validate or compare the data, then one thing, simplest thing can be like we just see the difference between experimental and numerical results, or expected result and the experimental data. And then we come to the conclusion. Like I told that my student came to me, so that example can be taken. But most of the time it may not be sufficient, and reason I already have explained, that trend should also be checked. Otherwise, it will lead to some other direction. Then we should also see how much data should be used to validate, which data should be used to validate. Suppose I have 20 experimental result and or 20 simulation result, and I validate the model with only one data. It may not represent the true result. Maybe at that particular point, the accuracy is good, but as I will deviate from the process condition, error can be very high. So general guideline, we can say that we should validate to the extreme values as well as to the middle values, because usually in middle we see the change in trend, and to the extreme value we can say that if it is matching at the extreme value, then extreme, and at the middle, then in between there has to be some curve fitting only. So most probably it will validate correctly in between also, until it have some complex relations like this. Suppose I validate here and here, then it may be possible it may not validate here. But these kind of response is not very usual. It can be some complex behavior. But for most of the cases, if we validate at the ends and at the middle, then it can solve our purpose. Then how much variations is there or how much errors is there? Error in respect to average experimental value, and in experiment itself, how much variation is there, that should also be considered. Because if variation is very high, then also there is something wrong. Then hypothesis can also be, testing can also be done to make the rational decision. Like here also we can make the hypothesis that our numerical model is in good agreement with the experimental result. And with this hypothesis, we can start testing the hypothesis using this formula. And in that way, rationally we can define, means sometime people can object. How can you say that this much error is there, this much error is there? Then rationally we can, with proof, we can say, okay, I have done a hypothesis testing, and based on that, I am coming to the conclusion that with this much of confidence level, my model is predicting the value correctly. So those kind of techniques can also be there. And usually these techniques help very much when reviewers or examiners, they point out on the validity of the work. Then these techniques help a lot to defend ourselves. Now, for survey kind of research, we have to prepare the questionnaire. So these questions can be open-ended or close-ended. So in open-ended, respondent has to write the answer, and in closed-ended, we can give questions like where they have to make a selection only. So multiple choice question, true, false, yes, no, or we can ask them to uh, mm, give a give an input on a scale of say 0 to 5 or 0 to 10, etc. So these options also we can put in order or not, because these can also be sometime if we put everything in order, then respondent can have a tendency to select a particular one only. The respondent may not read the responses, but by default he will put some random values. So that's why sometimes we don't put them in order as well. Then we can also give the progress bar if it is done digitally, so that respondent will know that how much I have done and how much is remained. If we see the types of questions sequence, how it should be, then first we can have screening question itself. Say, for example, we can simply ask, suppose we want to conduct a survey on non-vegetarians. So first question can be, are you vegetarian? Are you non-vegetarian? Yes and no will decide that, okay, this candidate can be screened. Or the question can be, do you want to participate in the survey? Then if candidates say no, then the candidate will be screened out. Then we can have some very easy questions so that the respondent will not feel uh, uh, irritating or will not find it hard to respond. So we say it warm up. So it will build his or her interest in the survey. Then we can have some transition type question so that we can make different areas flow well together. So suppose we want respond in two different aspects so that they will flow together. It should not happen that we keep on asking questions from one area and suddenly at the end we switch to other area. So it should have some mix of. Then we can have some skip type question. So suppose if you answer yes, then you can skip the next question like that. And if you say yes, then you have to this question, otherwise not like that. Then we can ask some difficult questions. So because meanwhile the interest will create, and a respondent will also see that progress bar have move a lot. So there is not much to respond. Then the respondent may write for the difficult questions as well. And then suppose we have some questions which needs classifications between the samples, then those kind of questions should be asked in the last. So suppose we ask, say if the survey is based on some religion, so we are asking religion, that can be asked in the last. Or if we are asking gender or the age group, that can be asked in the last, which will classify between the. Otherwise, sometimes people become negligent to respond if these kind of questions come in the start. Now, while preparing questionnaire, we should take care that question should not misinterpret its meaning for different members. And we should make sure that different opinions will give different answers. So it should not happen that suppose I want to make a survey for vegetarian and non-vegetarians. And if I ask, do you eat chapati? Then obviously vegetarian as well as non-vegetarian both will say yes. There is no meaning of asking this question. So questions should be made in such a way that different people or people from different opinion or different category will choose different options. Then use only one aspect of the construct you are interested in per item. We should not target everything that in a survey we will ask everything. Then it will be very boring as well as very long as well. And most of the people will skip from the survey. Then positive statements we should use. We should avoid negatives and double negatives. So for example, we should not ask, don't you take, you don't take vegetarian, and then we ask for yes or no. Instead of that, we can ask, do you take non-veg? And then candidate can fill yes and no. These negatives we should avoid. Then we should not make any assumption about respondent. We should be totally neutral, like we don't know how they are going to respond, what will be the, because once we are not neutral, then there is no meaning. Obviously, we will come to biased conclusion. Then use clear and comprehensive wording, which is easily understandable to all kind of educational level. Then correct spelling, grammar, punctuation, because if there is some mistake, then respondent will also take it very casually. Okay, yeah, sahi hai. Then avoid items that contain more than one question per item. So, like in one question we ask, do you eat potato? In another question we ask, do you eat ladyfinger? Then do you eat cucumber? That we can ask one question, which of the item do you like? And then we can give many options, and whichever the item select. Then question should not be biased or participant towards an answer. Say, for example, say that our director is doing great work. How do you evaluate? Then obviously already participant has some positive thing in their mind, and we are somehow forcing them to give good rating. Then think of having an open answer. So even our questionnaires are closed type, but in last we can give some open answer so that we will better know about their views. Then in experiments, many times we have to handle big data, and handling or representing all these data sometimes really very difficult. And in that case, we can go for index notation. And index notation can be to present various components as well as expressions as well as equations involved. Means we can represent scalar, vector, and tensor. We can represent values. We can represent expression, and we can also represent equations as well. So how it works? Like suppose I say Vi. So I is the index, and it represents various components. So Vi can be written as like V1, V2, V3, and it can have more components. So suppose we have 1000 data. So we can simply write for mentioning or labeling them 1000 times, we can write Vi, and Vi will include V1 to V1000. We can define the range of I varies from 1 to 1000. Similarly, if we say Vij, then it represents V11, V12, V13, V21, V22, V23, V31, V32, V33. And here also I varies from 1 to 3 and J varies from 1 to 3. Then it has 9 components. And suppose they varies from 1 to 4 both, then total 16 components will be there. Then summation conventions. So Einstein's summation convention is employed for writing the sum of various terms in condensed form. So in this convention, what happens if an index occurs twice in a terms, then it represents the summation of the terms. So suppose I say AI, BI, it means I want to say A1, B1 plus A2, B2 plus A3, B3, because here I is repeating 2 times. But earlier this was not the case, because here I and J both are coming once only. Similarly here also I is coming once. It means they represent different terms. But have repetition of one index, it represents summation. Similarly, I, here also I index is repeating 2 times. It means it is summation. So it is I11 plus I22 plus I33. So repeated index is called dummy. So here I is the dummy index, and non-repeating is called free index. So here I is free index, and in this I is dummy index. So you can see here. So suppose if I say C, I, J, B, J. So here I have one free index and one dummy index. It means for free index, we will have different terms, and for dummy index, we will have summation. So we can expand it like C, I we can keep constant. First, we can take care of J, dummy index. So CI1, B1 plus CI2, B2 plus CI3, B3. Then we can put the value of I. So it will become C1, B1 plus C12, B2 plus C13, B3. This is one term. The term is C. I will become 2. So C21, B1 plus C22, B2 plus C23, B. And similarly, we will put I is equal to 3 also. So we will have 3 terms. Similarly, Pij, Qij, here both are dummy index, so it will be the summation of these terms. So you can see equations and long terms can be put very easily using, or even mathematically means we can handle those terms very easily using summation convention. So here, like if we take an example of writing this term, these equations, even we can say Ti is equal to sigma ij and j. It can be expanded in this way. So these are 3 equations of summation of 3 terms. Otherwise, it is very difficult to handle it, but in summation convection, it can be taken care easily. 2 symbols are also used very frequently in summation convention. That is Kronecker delta and permutation symbols. They also simplify the notation further. And property of Kronecker delta is that Kronecker delta ij is equal to 1 if I is equal to j. Otherwise, it is 0. So it means delta 11 is equal to 1. Delta 22 is equal to 1, delta 33 is equal to 1, but delta 12, delta 13, delta 23 all are 0. Similarly, epsilon ijk, that is permutation symbol, it has 3 values, 0, +1 and -1. So if 2 or more indices are equal, then it is 0. So if I say epsilon 112 or epsilon 223 or epsilon 233, all will be 0 because here indices are repeating. But if they are different and they are in even permutation, say for example, epsilon 123, epsilon 231, epsilon 312. So because it is in cyclic order, then its value is 1. But if it is in odd permutation, which we say anti-cyclic order, say for example, I say epsilon 321, 213 or 132, then its value will be -1. I did not put example because I just added it in the last. Otherwise, you could see by using these symbols, how easily we can put very big equations or very big expression in very small form. But these are very popular in these. Now, sample size. Type sample is very important for getting accurate and significant result. So if sample size is too small, then we may not get good results. And if it is too big, maybe we will have a lot of information, but results will become confusing because it will be interaction will be complex, a lot of data will be there, it will be expensive, time consuming, etc. So that is also maybe it will give advantage of more information, but ultimately if we consider other factors, it may not be beneficial. So while deciding sample size, we have to take into consideration the population size, margin error, confidence level, standard deviation, cost of sampling, difficulty in collecting data, desired precision of final results, variability of the population, and how much is already known, means how much information is already. So these kind of informations are needed. If mathematically we want to calculate, then we have to select the confidence level, and then we can calculate using this formula. So for any confidence level, we have score values. Say for example, 90%, we have 1.645. For 95%, we have 1.96. So for these standard tables are available. These are the values, basically again based on the probability and normal distributions. So sample size we can calculate using Z score square into standard deviation into 1 minus standard deviation divided by margin of error square. And in that way, we can calculate the sample size. So some guidelines are also there, because many times these calculated value may not be suitable much, because if you will see in this, then you will see that population size is not considered, then cost of sampling is not considered, difficulty level is not considered. So these things are not considered, and that's why many times people, instead of going for calculating mathematically, they go for other practical aspects. So some guidelines which are given by expert is that minimum sample size should be 100, or we can go for 10% of the total population until it does not exceed the number of samples as 1000, because otherwise it will be very difficult to handle them. And we can choose any number between minimum and maximum based on the situation. So we can choose lower number if we have limited time and money, and we need rough estimate, and decision is not critical based on the study. Then we think that most people will give similar answer, then also we can choose less number. And result do not have significant, so if we want to implement it, don't have significant consequences. And on other way, we can go for a larger size. So if we don't agree with this, then we can obviously go for maximum size. Other than this, if suppose our influence of the results is more, we can say cost of implementation is more, then we should go for more number of samples. If we talk about manufacturing, that how these activity, how these things are applicable in manufacturing, then in manufacturing, these are the activities which involves product process, design, manufacturing process, inspection, transportation, assembly, maintenance, etc. And you can see that at all of the level, we can conduct some experiment, we can have some improvement in the process, we can change the process, we can improve the process at any level. And that's why whatever we have discussed till now, all are applicable in the manufacturing sector, and not only in the manufacturing sector in general, but we can say at all level of the manufacturing. Like using all these techniques, we can improve the design, we can improve the manufacturing process, we can better inspect the quality control, we can improve the transportation, we can have better process planning, etc. So at all level, it can be used. If we see the manufacturing system, then we can say that like any system, there is a system which has some inputs and which have some outputs. So in manufacturing system, input can be material, energy, demand, social politics, information, labor, government policy, and environment. And output can be the manufactured products, some information, service, defects, scraps, wealth, age of life, and environmental change. So this system basically I have made based on considering the sustainability of the manufacturing system. So it has all the factors which involves environment, economy, and the social impact. And to improve any system, we have to have optimization of all the parameters collectively. But what is the problem? Not only in manufacturing system, but in other system as well. Like if you want to go for mathematical estimation or improvement in the system using mathematics, then in mathematics, one of the major problem is that the same kind of quantity can be processed mathematically. Suppose we want to have summation of length, then in length we can add only length. We can't add area into length because both have different units. So this is, we can say, one of the most challenging thing, because here material is the input which will have different units. Say we can define in terms of tons. Energy will have different unit. Demand will have different unit. Labor will have different unit. Environment, suppose we define the concentration of carbon, etc. So similarly for output as well. So how to handle this problem, that all inputs and outputs have different units? So one can be that we don't go mathematically, and we just define some coefficient for each of the input, and then we, because once we take coefficient for the inputs, then it don't have any inputs, then we can perform the mathematical operations. So those kind of techniques can always be there, and even we can have some expert view, etc. But if we want to go for mathematics, then one of the easiest approach can be that we change all these inputs and outputs to unitless numbers. Say, for example, suppose materials we can define in terms of, in tons. So we can convert it into the ratio of order material to the weight of the final product. Then it will become, ton will be cancelled by the ton, and it will become a unitless number. So similarly for energy, we can say energy input by energy output. Means we can find some way to convert these inputs into unitless number, and then we can process it mathematically, and we can calculate the output results. So that can be one of the way. So I'm sorry I have taken some more time, but I will conclude here. So in this lecture, I have discussed about basics of experiments, its design, data handling, and various statistical technique like hypothesis testing, sample size selection, data analysis, how to find, how to validate the model, how to collect data, how to prepare questionnaire. So these kind of aspects are discussed, which are important for conducting experiment and to analyze the experimental results. A brief of manufacturing system is discussed based on the previous discussion. And with this, I thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you.
Now I
Thank you very much, sir, for such a nice and in-depth lecture.
yeah, thank you.
So now it is time for participant. You may discuss some your query with Professor Ravi. Any question, participant can discuss without any hesitation. So I think there is no query, Professor Ravi, sir.
Yeah,
You
I
have
think-
cleared each and everything in such a well-defined manner that there is no question of doubt left, sir.
yeah, thank you very much. Actually, maybe I don't know like how was the lecture, because it's many times it's formality to praise.
Can we get
right
some
speakers.
some feedback from the participant? How
But
was the lecture?
but
Yeah,
I am
others-
a bit relaxed because I was really a bit worried because I told I gave lecture on this topic first time, and suddenly after getting your email, whatever I planned, it suddenly changed. So I changed the content.
But
Hello, sir.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Can I give the feedback? I am Dr. Chandrakumar from RV College of Engineering, Bengaluru.
Yeah.
It was a nice session, sir. So
Yeah,
we did not feel it is the first time. Actually, I thought of asking some YouTube video link of yours so that I can refer. So can you suggest some papers of yours or some reference material so that we can take it forward, take it further, sir?
Papers in this particular topic, or means you are asking about my research area?
Optimization in general on UOE, etc.
Okay, so I don't know how to, but I think you can search Ravi Space Kant and IIT Ropar. Then you will get my Google Scholar link. Otherwise, you can drop me an email. Always, I respond to email usually.
Yeah. I would like to explore more on design of experiments, sir. So thank you, sir, and all these statistical aspects.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And yeah,
So, Professor Ravi, you have covered the various aspects of experimental design and different ways to develop experimental
yeah,
design.
Professor Siddiqui, before
Yeah.
concluding, can I announce something?
Yes, sir.
Actually-
Fine. You
Yeah,
can.
actually, we are conducting one conference on advancement and futuristic trends in mechanical and materials engineering, AFT MME 2021. So I request you all to participate in this conference. It will be in both online and offline mode. And other than that, you are always welcome to explore my lab facilities. Our institute as well as myself always encourage these kind of collaborations and to share the facilities.
Sir, can you share some wavelength of your conference in the chat box? It would be better.
Yeah, let me find. It is on Easy Chair as well.
Yeah.
But I will share Google website link. Last 2 times I conducted this conference, and this time my friend is conducting. So this is, I think, 10th international conference and got a good reputation.
Really.
At least for last 3 times, we can say it is. Means most of the papers are getting published also in some of the journal or book, etc. And this time also we have at least 2 SCI journals and some Scopus Index journal associated with this conference.
Very nice, sir. Very best wishes, sir. Best wishes.
Yeah, thank you. Now, Dr. Siddiqui, you can.
I along with Dr. Ravi, I would like to add something here. I'm also part of these previous conferences.
Okay.
So I also request all the audience who are listening to me that please participate in this conference, because this is really a very good platform to present your work, as well as the papers will be definitely published in some of the journals of repute. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Siddiqui, for allowing me to speak something. Thank you.
Also, thank you for joining us today.
No, sir. I was there in morning session also, as well as in first day.
Fine. So now it is time for concluding remarks. I am thankful to you, Professor Ravi, for such a nice and wonderful lecture about the basic concepts of design and analysis of experiment. Dr. Ravi has covered various aspects of experimental design and the ways to develop experimental design, how to do data analysis, data presentation, data error, how to detect the error in your data, experimental data. He also discussed about the hypothesis testing and its significance, data optimization, whether it is conventional or non-conventional. And finally, the validation part, that is very important. If your validation is not okay, then all the previous exercise you have conducted is of no use. So personally, what I observe that your presentation is very systematic and very simple, sir.
Thank you.
And your presentation skills are excellent, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Which is a very important quality of a good teacher, which I personally observe, sir. What participant observe, that I cannot say, but this is my personal comments and personal feedback about your presentation. So my best wishes to you, Professor Ravi, for your bright future. And thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah.